how did Baby come about?
My first marriage. I'd like to tell, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. Now, my first marriage was to Francis Coppola's sister, Talia. Talia Shire is really Talia Coppola. And I spent a lot of time with him. He loved musicals. He directed musicals in college. He even wrote lyrics to musicals. And we were driving one day in Napa, and I was saying, gee, Richard and I are trying to think of, it's almost impossible to think of something to write these days. And this was the period when big musicals were really coming in and kind of wiping out small musicals. Everything was becoming about sets and helicopters.
Chandelier.
And Francis, who's very smart, said, well, why don't you do something small? I said, okay, but about what? He said, well, what's the most exciting thing that's happened to you in the last 5 or 10 years? And I said, being present at the birth of Talia and my son. And he
Symphony orchestra went.
yeah, he just went. So I went back to Richard, and typically I told Richard what about this, and he said, that's a terrible idea.
Well, it was. It was because
There was nothing. It was like walking in with the score and nothing else. But what was there was an incredibly rich bunch of emotions that Steve hadn't written about.
Probably never would.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't until later that I mean, as I started thinking about it, that I realized that it wasn't really about babies at all. And Baby isn't about babies. It's about how the advent of children changed your life and change your what it has to do with how it changes relationships. This when at that time, which was just the end of the 70s. In the 70s, there were a lot of sort of new wave movies, mostly out of England, Darling and Georgie Girl and a whole bunch of movies like that. 5 or 6 of them, maybe even more. And they were all about sort of the new freedom, the new sexual revolutions, people sort of being in relationships, lots of free love and lots of stuff going on. And I noticed after about the 5th one that all of these movies had one thing in common, and that is 3/4 of the way through the movie, the heroine got pregnant. And I thought that was kind of a joke. It was like, can't you think of anything else? But in fact, what each of the people writing the story was about was that yes, there could be this new age, and yes, you can have all kinds of relationships that are sort of this and sort of that, and maybe real and maybe not, and you can fly around. But a baby is reality. A baby stops you dead in your tracks, and then you have to sort of say, who am I to that person? Do I really want that person to be my father? Am I going to be with that person forever? Is that person really important to me? So the child stopped you. The child was reality, and then I realized that was the key. That was what unlocked the story, because here we decided there was going to be 3 couples at different ages, and in each case a child was going to come up and completely change their life.
Or not.
Well,
Pam and Nick, which was really Talia's and my story to a certain extent, because we spent a long time trying to conceive, and went through Zift and Mift and Lift and all of those technologies that were just being invented. So that was one story.
yeah, but it was an original. So the stories could be anything. The characters could be anything. And the hardest thing was to decide one story. I mean, what was their career? What was their job? You know, they could be anything. It could be a doctor, or, you know, we slowly evolved a group of people who were on a college campus, because that put generations together. We slowly evolved, you know, an athletic department for the couple that were having trouble conceiving. But it took a long time, and we had several different, I tried to write it, a very talented woman named Susan Yankiewicz wrote with us for a while. Tom who wrote Silence of the Lambs. Pardon me? No, the screenplay.
Terry.
Pardon me? No, anyway, he came in for a short period of time. He didn't stay very long. He kind of didn't know what to do with it. But he did leave behind the big laugh in the show. One joke line that actually was great, was "You're shooting blanks." Then finally we found Sybil Pearson, and we just decided that she was the writer for us. We waited for a while, and we worked with her on it, and slowly evolved the show. But we kept learning things. Again, it's very much like our whole process. On the very first day of the Broadway rehearsal, raising the money was impossible. You know, we had no stars, we had no anything going for us. And in fact, we didn't even have all the money. Jim Freiberg, our producer, and I reminded me that I too had signed a note for like $50,000. I didn't have $50,000. Well, just, you know, what can I do? The show had to happen. So on the first day of rehearsal, we read through it, because we'd done a great deal of work leading up to it.
3 or 4 workshops over a period of 6 years. It was not really.
Right, and we read through it, and there was something kind of dark and rather sad about it all. It seemed to be saying, babies ruin lives. Which may or may not be true, but you didn't want to go to the theater and be told that. I get enough of that at home. So we began to try to define what it was. And while we have a standing cast that is actually rehearsing the show right, as we go ahead, but we're trying to figure out what's going on. And we realized that the basic principle of playwriting is conflict. That's what you write. You write people that go head to head. Well, except if the issue is a baby. If you are married to somebody and you belong together, if you're a good marriage and the baby comes in, and you cannot, even though your heart may be saying, you stupid woman, how did you get pregnant? Your mouth will say, I couldn't be happier. And then you would try to deal with this somewhere inside of you, because you realize immediately that things that you want, you're going to have to give up. If you're not ready for it, you have to adjust to it, you have to make room for it, you have to become a different person. And so we realized that, and then we began to rewrite it. And during the 4 weeks of rehearsal, we rewrote the whole show. And as a result, I think it's the subtlest musical of all, because in scene after scene after scene, nobody actually talks about what's going on. It's people who are being ripped apart, but they can't actually confront each other over it until, as the plot develops, they reach a point where they cannot avoid it anymore, and they actually have to face their partner naked, emotionally, totally naked. When you actually say, this is what I am, this is what you are. And I think it's, I don't know another show that does that, and I'm really proud of it. But it's very deceptive. Again, you can just see these scenes as a bunch of sitcom scenes, and I've seen it played that way, where it seems as if no one connected with the production thought there was anything serious going on at all. But they're all really, really profoundly serious moments dealt with in avoidance.
I think I'd be curious on both of your thoughts. It seems to me it's one of the most truly beloved musicals from Broadway. It seems to have touched, even though it's not one of the longest running, but people talk about it with such passion's not quite the right word, but affection and reverence even. And there was just the evening celebrating it at the Transport Group, which I was here, but
I don't know
it was a wonderful success.
If anyone knows that this happened with a theater group called the Transport Group does a benefit in which they honor somebody. And they called up and said they wanted to do a benefit and honor Baby, not us, Baby. And it happened to be, the day they picked was the first press night of Closer Than Ever. And there were a bunch of other, it was Lynn Meadows' 40th anniversary at Manhattan Theater Club. Everything was on that night. And I said, you know, I'm doing the show, I can't participate. And they said, oh, you don't have to do anything, just show up. And I tried very hard to forget that it was even happening. In fact, I did forget that it was even happening. And David had to remind me, so we went down there. It was at the Lortel in the Village. And what they had done was they did the entire score of Baby with a different cast for every number. So there were 60 people who performed the show. 30 in the first act who then left, and another 30 came in the second act. And what was really, really touching was that every single one of them had been affected by this show, like when they were in college or something. They had entered their life. They wanted to be there and participate. Some people just came in and did 3 lines in the song, and they were thrilled to be there. And it was so moving because, you know, you don't know that that's happening. But every one of them had this incredible experience when this show entered their life. And it's because of the nature of what I said before. Actors who go into this show find themselves having to tap into an emotional place in themselves that, as musical theater performers, they're almost never asked to do. You don't ever have to get to that complete raw simplicity that and humanity and real life in almost any musical that I know. So when they do encounter that, it alters them. And so we were sitting there, and it's people who, you know, were featured or stars in all of the Broadway shows, and they were all telling stories about. Well, they didn't all tell stories, but they were all there because of that. Oh dear, it was really kind of nice.
And interestingly, several reviews of this show said, when is the York going to do a production of Baby, which so deserves to be seen. And a number of people in the lobby who have said, please, that's my favorite show, you must do it now that you've done this.
It's curious, there's been so much talk of, you know, through the years, people coming to us say, can we do a revival? The most prominent one was the Roundabout. It gave us a big workshop, and you won't believe the cast. So Nick Lonnie Rose, Chad Kimball,
John Dawson, Victoria Clark,
Norm Lewis,
LaChance.
and LaChance. And it was phenomenal.
All 3 women won Tonys in the next 3 years. It was absolutely breathtaking, and they didn't go ahead
And
with
they
it.
didn't go ahead with it. So we did it at Paper Mill, but we couldn't get those people. And it was okay, but it didn't, you know, attract any interest in moving it in. So we've been waiting. We hope maybe that the higher and higher profile of this show now will get somebody to actually go through it. It's done all over the country. It's done all over the world. We've seen productions all over the place. But for some reason, and I can't quite figure out why. Maybe you can.
I don't know. But it was really moving to see that, and I think if there is a groundswell to bring it back, that event is going to have play a large part in it, because it's the same theme. Dave and I are sitting there in this show. We had no preparation for it, and it was emceed by Liz Calloway and Todd Graff. They didn't perform, but they told anecdotes, and they were so brilliant. And then they would do a song and a song, and I was thinking, God, there are no clinkers on this score. All scores have clinkers. I mean, every show has at least one number that you kind of have to slog through to some moment when you go and have the cigarette in the lobby. And there weren't any clinkers. I thought that was pretty good.
Let's skip to your next Broadway show, Big. Lovely.
Another show that really makes sense. I know. We seem to have a knack for writing shows that run 89 months.
Just so you know.
But then get done on it. It's very weird.
And then get done everywhere.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, a number of people came up to me at intermission and said, I cannot stay too much longer. I have a thing I have to do, so please forgive me if I get up and leave. So I just wanted you to know that we're...
oh, you won't be the first, and you won't. People have been walking out on us all.
So Big. It was a big hit movie. Who had the idea that...
My second wife and final wife, almost 30 years. We had trouble conceiving. We finally wound up adopting, but while we were going through all of that gift, lift, zip stuff, she was in the hospital one night for some artificial insemination with frozen sperm. You know, that whole rigmarole. But I was used to it by then. And she was watching television, and the movie Big came on. So when I got to the hospital the next morning, she said, I know what your next musical should be. You've got to do Big. And it turned out that my second wife is Dee Dee Khan, and she was in Grease, and one of the producers of Grease, Larry Mark, was also involved with the movie Big. So we actually could get the rights relatively easy. And Jim Freiberg thought it was a terrific idea, and I guess we thought it was a terrific idea.
Well, it took us a while, as it always does, because you had to kind of crack open the story. You can't adapt a movie because it was a success. You know, you only have to look at the theater to see all the shows that attempted to put the movie on stage, and you know, and they don't work. You have to reinvent the story. You have to go. So therefore, you have to go and tap what it really was. Luckily, John Weidman came on the show with us, and the three of us really ripped the story apart and tried to figure out exactly what happened. And it was interesting at that time. It was the early '80s, I guess, when the movie came out. There had been 4 or 5 body shifting movies. I don't remember any of them right now, but Steve Martin and somebody had one. And there were a whole bunch of ones where you wake up and you're in somebody else's body, you know, and that sort of thing. Yeah, and none of them, only one seemed to have captured people's genuine imagination. Why was Big different from all of the others? What did it tap into? And we realized that it really was about the natural human impulse to somehow, when you're young, you just want to skip over childhood and get to being a grown-up. You just don't want to have to endure that process, and yet that process is what you have to go through in order to be a grown. That was, so it's a story about somebody, a kid who was able to skip it and become a grown-up while still being mentally a kid. So it was tapping into something that was fundamental to human existence. There's one American says, we want to get to grown up without the growing part. So it expanded out of that, and it was a very complicated process coming into New York. We wrote a lot of new songs out of town. Subsequently, we put some of them back and showed a little bit better
for the national tour.
Yeah.
Which was a different direction.
Eric Schaefer directed. He asked, when he came on the project, to see all of the early drafts, which is a pile about that high. We read them all and listened to. We wrote 54 songs to create 17 or 18 in the show. And he came back and said, why didn't you do draft number 3, and why are all these songs cut? There's a long story about that. But the show just got too big. It buried what it was really talking about. And it became about chandeliers and scenery, in this case a roller coaster and all of that stuff. And we lost the heart of it. But Eric went back, did it much more simply. And for instance, the Variety reviewer who creamed us in Broadway came back and saw the opening night in Hartford at the National Company and wrote a rave and said, why the hell didn't these guys do this one? So it was very frustrating.
And that was where you all said, wow, this is really good.
Yeah. Same thing. Our recurring theme takes us 2 or 3 stabs, and we have had about 5 years to look back at it and say, oh my God, that was really good.
And again, it's a show that's done a lot.
Yeah,
in regional and even foreign.
It's funny, I every now and then a friend of mine will do a show that fails, gets bad reviews and closes or something. And it's usually, I mean, when it's a really good show, but it's sort of not treated well by the press, which does happen. I say, because I believe it, we always win. We always win. They can't really touch it. If the show is really good, it will survive. It will go out with musicals, particularly. The album goes out, people fall in love with it, it gets produced all over the place, and it really does get produced all over the place. And we win. It's nice to believe that when you're getting bad reviews.
but it is true, though, over time, that one day where the reviews, or even the one bad review, or the one good review with a nasty remark in it, is forgotten.
Assassins was creamed, and it's now considered a work of art. Merrily We Roll Along was creamed, and is now considered a work of art. Assassins, pretty much the exact show that was creamed, was a work of art. Merrily has been rewritten and rewritten, but it just happens.
And Closer Than Ever would have run a lot longer, except the one bad review we got was from the New York Times. And that was the one that meant the most. From a critic who was only on staff for 2 or 3 months, reviewed 13 shows, plays and musicals, creamed them all.
And was fired.
Wasn't
that lucky for us?
And was yours the first one that she reviewed?
No, it was the middle. After she had savaged re-reviewing the Heidi Chronicles, because the new cast and the Pulitzer Prize winning, Tony Award winning, and she panned it.
She panned it for being, but for a very specific reason, for being a feminist sellout. She was some sort of proto-feminist. And we read that review and said, oh God, we are screwed. Actually, we didn't. We said something more severe. Because sure enough, she took the life story, the patterns, all the women's songs in the show, and referred to them and dismissed them as the whinings of unhappy women. It's like, okay.
Well, now, as a writing team, I think each of you have, how do I put this? Each of you have significant other careers outside of your career as a writing team together. I can't think of another writing team that where there's such significant, yeah. How has that affected your writing together?
In many good ways. I mean, I'm proud of my scoring career in movies I've scored, and it's influenced my theater writing in that you get to really compose things on a scale for movies that you don't have the same kind of compositional opportunities in the theater. So it's enriched, each career has enriched the other. The negative thing is, I think, and I don't know if Richard will agree, these other careers have prevented us from writing more musicals. And I've always felt a little squeamish, I still do, that we only have, 4 significant things out there. We've had 5 or 6 other shows that we've written that haven't even come in or that have been close to coming in. And, sometimes in the stillness of the night, I wish Hollywood hadn't beckoned and we had written 5 more shows instead. We talk about it quite a bit.
I'm not sure though, I mean, whichever road you take, the longing is a given. I don't know, I'm not sure that we didn't gain a lot out of it. I know that when I
said
I mean, literally, that it changed the way that we wrote when we came back together again, because I've been sort of training myself to be a director, and spent 10 years saying yes to anything, to nightclub acts and benefits and anything.
But also Long Day's Journey tonight.
Yeah. Well, yes, my first professional directing job was directing Long Day's Journey Tonight. The most non-musical that ever was. It's 4 hours and the lights go up at the beginning and they come down at the end of the act. That's how much stage. The only thing I know is stagecraft, and this play has nothing in it but acting coaching. And I had never dealt with actors that way. But it was a big hit. It was a big hit, and I was acclaimed for bringing for the ensemble acting, and I thought that was really funny but in fact, I was given the cast. I didn't cast it. They were 4 people who were from the 4 corners of acting styles. They should never have met. They were all so uniquely and profoundly different, but somehow, in the process of rehearsing it, we managed to get a uniform style, and that was kind of wonderful. I didn't know what I was doing. Every morning at 7:30, I would call up Austin Pendleton and say, "This is what I did yesterday. What am I going to do today?" And Austin would, "Oh, you think I would do that?" I would say, "Well, I think I'm going to do this and this, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask him." Then I'll think, "Randy, if I try that," and he'd say, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I can do that." Every morning.
Well, speaking of shows that haven't come in yet or in the process, Take Flight, which has had significant presentations around the world, and most recently 2 years ago at the McCarter in Princeton, which I thought was
McCarter. It was done in London, it was done in Tokyo, in Japanese,
in Russia,
Russia, half in Russian.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful show. Can you talk about,
Someone should do it in New York.
anyone?
Someone should.
It really deserves it. It's gorgeous.
No, and we have more work to do on it, but we're waiting for someone. You know, we don't seem to work on things until there's a production coming up. And we call up gentlemen and we fix things that we think should be fixed. But Take Flight was interesting because that came from Richard. And
Yeah, blame it on me.
no. earlier versions of that show, I think if we get to do it again, we go back again.
It was a weird idea.
So many workshops of it, so many, it got worked over so much that I think we lost some of our regional.
There's a phrase among playwrights in New York called "death by workshop," where you workshop it and it slowly gets progressively, less focused. No, it was going to be. I don't know where this idea came, but it was about the idea of flight, but in a very non-linear grab bag kind of way, and it had important characters and totally unimportant characters sort of coexisting, and as such, nobody quite knew what to do with it, and very likely we we should have just stayed with the grab bag on a show that nobody knew what to do with, and let people figure out what to do with it. As a matter of fact, a gentleman who gave us a couple of years of his life trying to get the show on, Marty Bell, is out there right now. We're grateful for all of his efforts. But it was a hard show to define, and a very hard show to improve. And I'm not sure that the impulse to improve it wasn't in fact the problem. So. But it's got a great score. It's got 4 or 5 great scores. I thought sometime that maybe we should, do a concert version of it, do the entire score. I mean, do everything that we ever wrote for the show. It'd be about 3 hours, and then publish it along with all of the various scripts that we ever wrote, and just say, here, you want to do the show? Pick. Do something. Pick a plot.
Take a flight.
Please. Take flight. Take my flight, please.
Well, here's hoping that it actually does happen. It deserves it.
Right.
And, I think we're. We have time for a few quick, deeply meaningful questions. Yes, sir.
This is about Mr. Maltby's directing career. You've had a lot of success doing what are called now jukebox musicals, starting, I guess, with Amos Behaving and Mary Mann and Cynthia Wilde Show and Johnny Cash. Besides the challenge of putting a pop song catalog onto the stage and making it theatrically vibrant and viable, are there any other attractions for you as a director, and are there any other catalogs by songwriters that interest you?
Well, to begin with, I think that I keep expecting the theater community to take me out and lynch me for having invented the jukebox music. The first one was Ain't Misbehavin', and it's not really a jukebox musical. At least half of the songs in the show are not known, are completely obscure. I mean, we found songs that we called up the publisher and said, "You published this song. Here's a copy of it," because we did all that research. But it was based on it had a charismatic character. I worked with Mary Horowitz on a book musical of it, which he worked on for several months and then gave up on because Fats Waller didn't have a good second act. He died at 39 and nothing ever went anywhere. So we put it aside. And once again, Lynn Meadows said, I've got an opening in the cabaret. Why don't you do that Fats Waller stuff? And so just to do an act in the cabaret, I said, yes, we'll do that. And one thing led to another. But the main thing was, see, I'm not king of reviews. I've done more successful reviews in New York than anybody. The only 2 reviews that ever won a Tony, I directed both of them. And I think the secret is that I hate reviews. I think they're not very interesting, and so therefore I shovel into the shows all sorts of content that's sort of subliminal or even liminal. So I basically put most of the research that we did for the book musical of That's Waller's Life into Ain't Misbehavin'. It's filled with content. It's filled with content all over the place. You never really notice that it is, but it is. And when the show is over, you do have the feeling that you have, like you squinted at it. You got all of the contours of a play, of a musical play, without the story and the dialogue. So I call it the bookless book musical. And so I sort of invented that. A lot of the other jukebox musicals that have been done have attempted, quite obviously, to duplicate the success of Ain't Misbehavin', and they never steal the right thing. No, I mean, they just take the idea that it's a bunch of songs and they do one after another without any connective, and they don't understand that the reason that holds together is because there's a life underneath all of these, and it's Fats Waller's personality, and in many cases it's sort of factual information. That's not on the surface, but underneath it, and I believe audiences get it.
I saw another hand.
Over there.
Oh, yes.
Now, along the line of your individual work, I recently caught Miss Potter.
Yeah.
And I thought that was thrilling, the story of Beatrix Potter. Have you thought about musicalizing that story?
Yes, we have. I made a stab at it. It's a little bit tricky, but yeah.
We wrote 4 songs for the movie, but then directors were switched, and the director who wanted doing it really didn't want the songs.
The original impulse to do a movie musical, and because it had the animal characters and everything else, it ended up being but when I started it, which was a long time ago, movie musicals, you couldn't walk into a studio and say, I'm going to do a movie musical. You just turn around and go back out the door. That was that. But it was interesting. I never realized how low on the totem pole the screenwriter is. Everybody who did it said, we're only doing this because we love the screenplay. This is the best screenplay. We just love the screenplay. They had no interest in me being anywhere around the making of the movie. They, whatever, talked. They just said, well, we're going to make a wonderful movie out of your screenplay. And in fact, they did. They used my screenplay. I would complain to screenwriter friends of mine, and they said, wait a minute. They actually shot your scenes. About 85% of the movie was mine, and you got sole credit, and they didn't bring in a writer to rewrite it. What are you complaining about?
Dan, your experience in movies, is that similar? Feeling underappreciated, or is the composer in a different position?
The composer, you're talking about non-musical.
Right.
No, I think of the film composer as like a sonic set designer or a costume designer. We're ancillary artists who come in and help realize some of these visions. A director, writer, say in the case of the conversation, or a director, like in the case of Zodiac. It's totally different from the theater. I mean, a lot of the musical technique is the same. But the difference is when we do a theater project, we have decided what the story is, what the period is, what the characters are. So it's more like being a hired hand, whereas in the theater, we're doing the hiring.
And the drama still protects you.
Yes, yeah. And in the theater, the text is king, and the playwright is protected, and really has the most determination of what a project is going to wind up being.
So it is fair to say you have things that you are talking about for the future, perhaps even working on. Are there any that you are comfortable actually saying anything about? I had a feeling that was the answer, but that's perfectly fair. One last deeply meaningful question.
This concerns the direction of Closer Than Ever. I've seen it twice, and each time I saw it, I was impressed with the warmth among the characters, meaning they were touching each other even when they were not singing. It was just something that I hadn't seen before. Was that a directorial thing, or is that just the natural warmth of working in Jim Morgan's theater?
Did you see this production?
Yeah, this one, yeah.
It's, well, it's directorial, I guess, in that I gave them permission. I mean, people think that directing is telling people what to do. And sometimes it is that, but mostly it's putting everything on course. It's directing, like saying, go there. It's defining what the route is. And once we decided that we were going to be real people, that we were going to search into the songs for ourselves and stay, that we were going to talk to the audience conversationally, we were going to talk as if we were having a real conversation, engaging that way. And that there are a number of things, there are a number of ensemble moments, which I'm sure you've caught, which everybody sings the same thing. And we decided that everyone will sing the same thing as four individuals, and they do something different. Each one of them is doing something different all the time because each one of them is talking, because each of them is saying their own version of the same thing. So that leads naturally to being a person. And then the rest, if you are that, and then what's your relationship to other people on the stage? Well, it's going to be what it is as a person. The people are, I mean, it's a meticulously staged show, and yet at the same time, you have the feeling that people are just out there talking, you know, and living, and that involves being quite loose. They have all said to me that how grateful they were to be trusted, that this show gives them a chance to go out and really work without being picked over, you know, without being, you know, shoehorned into something that they have to do. And that's something that I guess doesn't happen very often in an actor's life. Very often you go in and you are, this is what you do it this way, and that's how much firmer you have. This allowed them to actually be people, and it's a kind of acting that, well, they don't often have permission to do it. And they were grateful for it, and I would listen. I mean, very often I would say, oh, in that moment you did something. That was really good. Keep that. And that was like permission to kind of go further with it. There was a moment when Jen Clella has a line, and You Want to Be My Friend, that says, and if you can't receive a woman's love, I could care less. That's the line. And it's always been done. If you can't receive a woman's love, I could care less. Suddenly in the performance one day where she was really talking, she said, if you can't receive a woman's love, well, that's what I don't mean about history. Suddenly, receive meant, he had said that. I have trouble receiving a woman's love. He was some bullshit crap, you know, where he tried to explain why he wasn't going to make a commitment. It was his fault and all of that stuff. So by just emphasizing the word differently, she gave that line an entire life. The whole relationship suddenly came alive. all she did was take that one word and just stretch it out. And I heard her do that, and I went, do that again, keep that. And if you're seeing it this afternoon, watch that line. And that opens the door to other things, other moments where you do the same thing. Christian, who does the Bear, the Tiger, Hamster, and Mole, which is a really complicated song, she had done a great deal of the work when she came in, and she had really thought out the process, the thoughts. So when she comes over, the line is, now the mole who's blind will never be confined to one male she's merely found. But she's decided that this is a woman who is so excited about her scientific knowledge that it's a way, it's a barrier to, it's a protection against being, you know, humiliated by pursuing a relationship that doesn't happen. That's really what's underneath the sun. So her excitement spilled over. So when she does it, she goes, now the mole who's blind will never be confined. And I mean, the sentence just came alive. And first of all, it's more vivid. You understand it better. You can hear it better. It makes more sense. But most of all, it has a personality. It's only a person would say it that way. And singers, we have two things that happen all the time in rehearsal. One is, the melody is not your friend. The melody is not your friend. These songs have really pretty melodies. If you sing the melody, you are dead. That is to say, if you just think the melody and just go with the pretty melody, the whole content will not happen. It'll just be a pretty melody and it'll go by. And the other is, while it's very conversational and personal and human and everything, you must be absolutely strictly on the rhythm that the song is written to, because the dialogue, the lyrics are written right to that rhythm, and we've actually done half your acting for you. You know, half the performance is done if you simply stick to the rhythm. And when they do that, then the meaning of what's going on comes alive. It's very helpful.
I'm afraid we have to, is it quick, Marty?
Yeah, one observation, because they won't tell you this. You know, I think you guys wrote an amazing version of Big in the first go-round, and then people came in and started saying, cut this song, cut that song, change it around. You wrote an amazing version of Take Flight. People started coming in and things started disappearing and all that. And, you know, if there's been any obstacle in your lives, it's been that you've been ideal collaborators and too cooperative with everybody, and a little more son of a bitchiness.
Well, fuck you, Marty. Be careful what you wish for.
That was great.
Now that high intellectual note. But you're right, actually, it's the danger point. The theater is a collaborative art. You must collaborate, you absolutely have to collaborate, and collaboration can lead you to something wonderful and miraculous that you would never have thought of. It can also lead you down the garden path. It can lead you to just sort of going off track, and then it's really hard to get back on it. How you maneuver that? Well, that's the subject for another.
Were you about to add anything?
I noticed you talking about the different aspects of your directing work, but there's one common theme, that you are a brilliant editor, and that your directing process, which is fascinating, because it doesn't look like you're doing anything, but it's, you are, I've come to appreciate it.
Showing off all.
No, it's what you said about steering people, editing them. Oh, that's the right idea, but just do it a little bit that way. You once remarked to me that what you did on Ain't Misbehaving is you took 5 people who all were talented, but had limitations, And you made them all look like they could do anything by just honing them down to their strengths and putting their strengths on the stage. And also you're a brilliant rewriter of lyrics. Richard has said to me on many occasions, I hate writing lyrics, and often he can't get started on writing the lyric to a melody I've given him. And that's why I started writing lyrics, because I would write a dummy lyric just to show him, and he would immediately say, oh no, it shouldn't be that, it should be this, and then he'd write the lyric. And my dummy lyrics kept getting better and better until some of them actually got into some of the shows, 2 of them in the show. But it seems like a common theme that you're very passive-aggressive in the best sense. It's not so great for
Passive-aggressive in the best sense.
It may not be great for your marriages, but it's been great for your life.
See, pay attention to the song There.
We really must end this delightful conversation. Thank you all so much. Thank you.